A confident, sighted 12-year-old goes blind. For those of us who are sighted, our automatic emotion is one of pity for the little girl. Is it dark when you are blind? How can you manage without seeing? But have we considered that those of us who are sighted focus a lot on ourselves with selfies, Facebook and Instagram, and perhaps don't see as well as a person who is blind? This is Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. I am Smitha Tharoor. Hello, I'd like to introduce Sabriye Tenberken. Sabriye knows what it is to be marginalised, as she became fully blind at the age of 12. Sabriye studied Tibetology, Central Asian Sciences at Bonn University and developed a Tibetan Braille Script. Since then, she travelled on horseback through the Himalayas in 1997, and she discovered that Tibetans, who in majority are Buddhists, have a stigma against people with disabilities. Especially blindness is seen as a punishment for something that you have done in your previous life. Accordingly, blind children in Tibet are often neglected, locked away in dark rooms, or sent to the streets to beg for money. Experiencing the situation inspired Sabriye to take action. In 1998, along with Paul Kronenberg, Sabriye Tenberken started the first school for the blind in Tibet. This school formed the foundation of Braille Without Borders, an organization that empowers blind people to take their lives in their own hands. In 2005, Paul and Sabriye also founded Kanthari in Kerala, a leadership institute for social change makers. Kanthari fosters individuals from all over the world who have overcome adversity and because of that carry a plan to create social change. In fact, when I was last speaking to Sabriye via Zoom, I remember that she spoke to somebody who was there from Afghanistan. So literally people from all over the world are now there in Trivandrum in Kerala. If this is not enough to keep her busy, Sabriye is a public speaker. She is also the author of My Path Leads to Tibet, a book that has now been translated into 16 languages. And with Paul, she also took part in the award-winning documentaries Blind Sight and Kanthari Change from Within. So as you can all imagine, I am hugely looking forward to talking to Sabriye and to hearing her stories of unconscious bias. Thank you so very much, Sabriye, to join me today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So unconscious bias is what we're talking about, Sabriye. So what do you understand by those two words?
Yeah, but after we had talked last time, first of all, I tried to translate it into German. And what I found out was Voreingenommenheit. And I need to translate it back to English. So what does that mean? Voreingenommen. Being voreingenommen means having a picture beforehand or a pre-picture. And then, of course, the unconsciousness comes into place. And when I thought about that, it didn't sound so bad anymore, because normally we are talking about he is biased, she is biased against, you know. So normally it's something negative. And after I translated it into German, having a picture beforehand, I asked myself, well, why do we actually create pictures beforehand? Mainly because we need to maneuver through this very, very complicated world. And I became less biased against biased, or being biased.
I love it, Sabriye. I am smiling and nodding to myself to hear you. I mean, I wish we all spoke German. And if we could only just Google translate into another language and understand the simplicity of these two words. Because to me, this is the power of it, you see. Rather than looking at it in a negative way, which so many people do, you have accepted that this is, of course, there are 100,000 images that come across to us on a daily basis. And how do we then filter? And so we create a picture. That's brilliant. Thank you. So what does that mean for you, though? What does that look like in terms of your stories of creating pictures beforehand?
See, I mean, we do create pictures of terminology. For example, blind, the picture of what does blind really mean? I think we talked about this last time already.
Great.
I don't think that blindness is such a bad word. A lot of people think that we have to replace it with a better word, right? Especially here in India, they try to be politically correct and they say you cannot use blind, you have to say visually challenged. And then I always ask myself, hey, wait a minute, I'm completely blind, I'm not visually challenged, right? And blindness actually makes me challenged in a completely different way. I have to use my brain all the time, right? I would like to go back to Tibet to explain one little incident which showed me very, very much how strong this bias against blind people can be, but also how you can transform the negativity into a very, very positive idea. So, for example, we went with these kids, with these blind kids who were at the margins of society, were pushed to the margins of society, by their own families. We traveled a lot, and we also visited monasteries. By the way, we visited Buddhist monasteries, and most of our kids were practicing Buddhists. So we had this honor to meet a very high Lama from, I think it was the Drepung monastery, which is a very famous monastery in Lhasa. And we went there, and there was Tenzin. And Tenzin asked this really high authority, religious authority, why am I blind? And then this guy tried to, I have to say, guys, sorry, it sounds disrespectful, but I really have to say it. This guy tried to make it very simple, and he said, because you are punished for something you have done in your past life. And actually, he went even a step further, and he said, you must have been a murderer in your past life. And then this kid, I mean, to try to tell a kid you have been a murderer in your past life, right? And leave it alone. I mean, what this man didn't have definitely no understanding of psychology. But I also must say this child, and now adult, he is now in the mid-30s, he was back then. He was a very, very reflective young fellow, and he thought about it. And he was not actually frustrated. He thought about it, and I asked him about it. I said, well, what's your idea about it? And he said, you know what I wonder, if I have been punished through blindness, why am I so happy? And why am I so lucky to actually be able to do so much more than my sighted sisters and brothers? For example, he can read and write, right? And this is something very powerful to change a bias, to change a prejudgment to something completely new, right? To something, to a completely new concept. And I think if we have the power to reflect on biases, if we have the power to step a little backwards and not just follow authorities, not just listen to what authorities try to tell us, but really critically reflect whatever somebody is saying. And you have to imagine this is a very hierarchical society, right? I mean, the lamas are very high up there. And this little boy of 8 years old, he says, no way, I disagree, or at least I'm confused, because he says I'm punished. I don't feel punished.
But hold on a minute. You've said quite a few very interesting things here, Sabriye, and I want to just kind of summarize them for my own understanding. One, because as you know, I'm of Indian origin, and people from India also believe in reincarnation. And if I were to kind of say it slightly differently, what's going on in your present life could have an impact because of what you did in your past life. As was said to the child when he was 7 or 8, that you might have been a murderer, and that is why you're going through a blindness. You were born blind. But there are culturally, and this is also part of our unconscious bias, which is kind of the headline of what we're talking about. Culturally, people are able to give explanations for bad things happening to them because of the cultural involvement of, in this instance, reincarnation. And what happened in your previous life impacts on your present life. Certainly, somebody born and brought up in Germany would not match with that because that cultural influence is very, very different. Then alongside that, there was something else you said, which is the fact that he accepted what this hierarchical leader said to him, that, you know, you were a murderer in your previous, it didn't bother him. He accepted it because that's his cultural DNA. What happens then happens now, it's fine. But it didn't bother him in any fashion to make him feel lesser than. If anything, it was the opposite. He was confident in himself and he genuinely saw himself as a happy child. So I wonder, with this 8-year-old child and his family, was there more cultural influence that gave him a sense of his own self-worth that perhaps other children did not get, that challenged other people's negative unconscious bias towards him?
Yeah, I'm not sure. He's coming from a family that is, most of the people in his family are illiterate. He now is the only one who is basically earning a lot of money. He's the person in the family that is taking care of the family nowadays. He has a huge business. He's running a big massage clinic and has a lot of employees. I think this little kid was just really a reflector and a very critical thinker. And of course, in our school that we created, we didn't really create a school. We thought more of a springboard, right? And discussions, for example, debates, reflections. That was a very, very strong, it was a very strong point in our daily life. We were constantly thinking about why are things happening the way they are happening, right? And children would go into the habit of questioning. And I do like that. They would not question things in a negative way, but they would start to look through and start to try to understand why society behave the way they are. So for example, when we had little children who came and they say, why do they throw stones at me, right? And we had these discussions, right? And then other children who were longer in our place, they say, yeah, because they are stupid. They don't know who you are, and they don't know that you're a human being, and they don't know that blindness is something that has also a lot of advantages. For example, you can read and write in the dark. Who can do this, right? So I do feel that, especially working with kids, back then I worked with kids, now I'm working with adults, but for adults it counts the same. I think it's very, very important that we are constantly reflecting on what people try to make us believe, and how is the reality for us? What do we believe? What do we make out of it? And this is getting out of the unconsciousness of our biases into the consciousness of our biases. Of course, it's very difficult. Yeah.
No, but that's very powerful, Sabriye, because I think this little boy was very lucky because he was already in your school in Tibet and had already begun to learn to read and write before he met that senior Lama when he asked that question about why am I born blind? And what had happened with him, and this is the point of, when I talk of unconscious bias, I talk about how we, all of us, are influenced by our narrative, our life story. And if you and Paul had not come into his life and set up that school, he would be a very different child today. I'm not saying it's only because of you. He obviously has the intelligence, the wherewithal, and everything that he has done, but that was a stepping board. He had the opportunity of using Braille Without Borders, the school that was there, to empower him. And that then became his new narrative. And that's what makes somebody, you use the word reflective. I would say it slightly differently. I would say that it makes us more confident in ourselves. And by making more confident in ourselves, we can then challenge our own unconscious biases, positive or negative, and be more successful in what we do. But yeah, but no, it's fantastic. So let's go back a bit, Sabriye, because in my introduction of you, I said that you became fully blind at the age of 12. So perhaps could you share a story with us about that, about 0 to 12, and then what kind of stories would there be around unconscious bias with regard to being able to see, and you're absolutely right, not being visually challenged, but being blind.
Yeah, I can actually start with a bias, with my own bias against blind people when I was sighted. I must say, I was very much influenced by this portrayed blind persons in television. You know, you see them stumbling around, you see them looking in the air, you see them not really communicating. Trying to find their ways with their hands and trying to, or looking a little bit like drunkards. And I was, I was very much biased. And then on top of it, I had a record or a fairy tale. And in this fairy tale, there was a blind person, and he tricked people all the time. I felt that blind people were not honest, were not from this world, were begging, were getting on our nerves, and didn't belong to us, right? And
that was your story.
That was
your narrative. Yeah.
That was my narrative, and that was my prejudice against blind people. And then I became blind myself. And of course, it didn't go overnight. It went very, very slowly. Actually, I still remember that it was not me that recognized that I'm blind, but actually my friends, my so-called friends, who were my friends before, and then later didn't want to be my friends anymore. They were making fun of me, that I was running against doors and windows that were open. And one day, I still remember I was standing at a lake that was frozen, and I could still see. And I looked at my friends that were ice skating on this lake. And normally on a lake, you go crisscross, right? You're not like in Epcot Center, just going in one circle. But they went in one circle, and I wondered, why is that, right? And I was a bit annoyed. I thought, like, hey, we have the freedom to go wherever we want. So I took my ice skates and I jumped on this lake, and I went right through the middle of the circle. And yeah, you can imagine why they actually made a circle. It was because there was a hole in the middle, and I went right in. I mean, it was not dangerous. Yeah, it was not dangerous, but exactly. It was a cold awakening, I must say. It was a cold awakening that I couldn't trust my eyes anymore. And now, being a kid with prejudice, being a kid also that bullied, that was ganging up with other kids. I was a favorite for a lot of children, right? I was with a lot of other kids, and we were the strong ones. And now I had a weakness, and it felt horrible. And then, of course, this teasing started. You know, in German we have a very interesting word to tease somebody who cannot see, and it's blind cow. I mean, you would never say that in India, I know, but in Germany it's really a bad word. You're a blind cow. So when I heard this the first time, I felt so miserable, and I had the feeling my life was ending here. I was sidelined. I was really afraid of being now the one who was going to be bullied, and in fact, it turned out like that. I was really afraid of being discriminated, being singled out, being lonely, but much, much more than that. I was fearing darkness. And of course, sighted people have this myth around blindness. It must be dark. So you only have, you only have the imagination just to close your eyes, or the methodology to close your eyes. And then, of course, that is for you blindness. Now, sighted people would tell me it will be dark one day. And then I went into the basement, and we have basements in Germany that can be very dark because there are no windows. So I switched off all the lights, and I tried my way around. And it didn't work. I fell over things, I hit my head. It was not a nice life. And I thought, like, if I have to live like that all my life, how terrible would that be, right? And that made me actually a completely different person. My parents, they became very, very worried because from an extrovert, I became an introvert. I didn't talk. I took myself out of the world, so to say. I saw myself stumbling through the world, and I felt this is horrible. I hated blindness, I really must say. But also children have resilience, or a lot of children have resilience, and a lot of children have this power to get out of there. And I must say, I have great parents who believed in the strength. They didn't protect me. They didn't overprotect me. They actually said, well, at one point you will get out of the mess and you will take yourself out of the mess. So this is the strength they gave me. And they read books to me, which normally had something to do with my life. And for example, one book was about the Black Power movement and how Black people in America, through this movement, became confident about themselves and about Black is beautiful and Black is something to care for, and so on and so forth. And when I heard this the first time, Black is beautiful, I still remember how I was laying on my bed and I just knew a few words of English, and I thought, like, Black is beautiful and blind is Black. Maybe blind is beautiful. And that was a huge, huge turning point in my life, where everything from being completely in the hole started to lift up again, where I could see a ladder out of the crevasse, right? And I took this ladder, and then I asked myself, so what is actually beautiful about being blind? And yeah, sometimes I talk to kids about this, and a lot of blind kids, they don't have an answer about. Nobody is asking them what is beautiful about being blind, right? But then when you ask them further, they realize, hey, there is something beautiful about being blind. So, for example, I can memorize phone numbers much better than my peers, right?
I can.
I can focus. I'm not influenced by Bollywood and Hollywood so easily, right? I can focus on what really matters, or I can communicate. And I have to communicate, and I have to be clear, because blindness forces me to be clear.
There are a few things here, Sabriye,
and so on and
no,
so
I mean,
forth.
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yes,
but you've
no
said
problem.
such amazing, powerful things, and I want us, all of us, the listeners and myself, to really capture those and grab those, because I was seeing you as a little child, 12 years old, and don't forget, 12-year-old girl, rising teenager. Think of young girls in the West and in India, or anywhere in the world. As you're getting into your teens, you've got your hormonal changes happening within you. You've got, other priorities about being visually beautiful, and I don't know,
Yes.
all kinds of important things. And suddenly, over a period of a few weeks or months, the rug is just pulled away from under your feet. And you go from being this extroverted, popular young girl about to be a teenager to someone who is bullied because she cannot see. And I really want us to understand.
From a bully to becoming a bullied.
Yeah,
well, I have to say that.
Thank you for that.
I really have to say that because I was not a nice kid always,
thank you for
many
your
times,
honesty.
And
so there's somebody else now, and there is this young woman, 12, 13, 14. You're growing into yourself at this point, and you're finding yourself. And then what you said is the wonderful example of how you came out of that deep dark hole is this one sentence: Black is beautiful. And you put, you focused on that. Blind is beautiful, and you came out of that. And talking to children. And I wanted to take something else away from that second part of what you said, which is again about our self-belief, being comfortable in ourselves and seeing the positive in ourselves, because all of us human beings have good, bad, and ugly within us. None of us are
Exactly.
amazingly wonderful. None of us are amazingly bad, with the very, very, very odd exception of maybe extremely, I don't know, some kind of mental psychopathic kind of human being. Most human beings are nuanced, and we have a little bit of everything within us.
Absolutely.
But many of us don't have that self-belief to focus on the good things within us and to pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, I can do this. And so you started finding, like you did with that little boy in Tibet, aged 8, you started finding things instinctively within you that made you feel good about yourself. And we said something when we met the last time, Sabriye, which was about unconscious bias. And I said to you, I always interview only on audio and no video because I don't want to see your face. And I don't want to see your face because I don't want to be influenced by your expressions, or I don't want you to be influenced by my expressions. I want to listen and really focus on what you're saying. And I said, you are so lucky, Sabriye. You don't need to do that because you're listening in. You're already there. You just do it instinctively. And I have to work so hard at it to really listen to what you're saying without looking at you. And there's your plus, and you've just got it there, and I don't have it. I have to work at it.
And by the way, the good news, it's not dark. I mean, that's really
tell us more. It's not dark. What is it?
No, it's
tell
not.
us.
It's absolutely not dark. At least not for me. And I have never really met a blind person, and I asked them honestly, right? Is it dark? And they say, not really. So the problem is people think it's dark because they think if you don't see, it's dark, right? But imagine you have a shoe, and your big toe is in the middle of the shoe. I mean, it must be dark, right? But it's not dark because the toe doesn't see. Now, this is something that somebody told me.
Is that a German problem?
No. This is somebody who told me who has lost one eye. So he's blind on one eye. And I asked him, so it must be dark on this one eye. And he said, no, because the eye doesn't see, right? So with me, it is still a little bit different. I think I see. I mean, an ophthalmologist would say, no, you don't, right? They have tested it many, many times because I never ever felt that I'm blind. So when
you went horseback riding in Tibet. You can't go horseback riding in Tibet.
I saw the landscape.
If you felt that you can't see, I mean, from where I'm sitting anyway.
But actually, a horseback ride was a little easier because the horse can see, and I just have to rely on the horse, right? But in a way, I mean, when I'm sitting on this horse, I can really enjoy the landscape. So whatever I hear is immediately translating into pictures, right? And whether it's voreingenommen, so what I said, my bias, my pre-made picture, or the picture that is made in myself, it's really, again, this picture that I create from the world surrounding me. And I must say, who knows, maybe my pictures are much more colorful than pictures of a lot of sighted people, right? And the question is, anyway, do we all see the same pictures? Is that really, is there a truth for everyone that is basically looking the same? That's a question of mine, right? So the thing is, what I found out with 12, and I'm really grateful for that. Actually, I'm very grateful for my life, right? I'm grateful. If I hadn't been blind, I had never met Paul in Tibet. I had never had the great chance to start the first school for the blind in Tibet, and I had never been here in Kerala, starting a center like Kanthari and meeting so many really interesting people who are coming from all around the world and who have overcome adversity in their lives and are able to transform this adversity into strength and into powerful ideas that make the world a better place. I mean, it sounds cliche, but they are really doing it, right? And there's another thing when we are talking about bias. Society is very biased against people who are engaged in projects that are going beyond their own interest. And now we are working here in Kanthari, we are working with people who are all here because they want to do something that goes beyond their own interest. They want to help the environment to get protected. They want to help children to get protected. They want to empower women who are facing violence. They are into peace movements and so on and so forth. And these are all people who have experienced adversity once in their life, and who have gone or who have overcome this adversity and now are transforming it into something that will help the society to change in a very positive way. And I ask myself, why is there such a strong suspicion against people who want to do good, who want to create something new, or who want to make social changes possible and changes in general possible, and who are not interested just in their own career and in making money. And this creates a lot of suspicion in people, and I really, really want to fight against that, because I see all these people from all around the world who come with their stories. Let me tell you one story. We had a guy from Uganda, and you know that in Uganda there was a civil war in Uganda, where Joseph Cooney was kidnapping a lot of children from villages, and he was one of them. He was kidnapped with 5 of his brothers, and they had to be, they went into the forest, and he stayed there for, I think, a month. And he made sure that his brothers could flee, but because he was a strong boy, they wanted to keep him, and they wanted to create a killer machine out of him. So Cooney, this terrorist, kidnapped children to make killer machines, to go into the villages, to take over villages, and to kill people. So and they tried to force him to kill a disabled person, and he said, "I cannot." And then they say, "Yeah, but then you know what we are doing. We have to kill you." And then he said, "Yeah, well, then you maybe have to kill me." And then he tells us how he stands there in this forest and waiting for the shot from this boy. There was another 17 years old, and he had to shoot him. And he said, "Well, this minute," he even heard the shot already, but there was no shot. He heard the shot in his ears, and there was no shot. And then he said, "Why don't you shoot? Just do it." And then this kid, he said, "Well, I cannot, because I know your father." Huh. So then he said, "Well, then shoot me in the foot and let me go." So he did. And he could still run, and he was found. Later, he said, "Well, this made his life this was a turning point in his life, because the fact that they were trained to become killer machines to kill disabled people in the villages, he said he wanted to change the society, and he became a teacher for people with disabilities. He became a teacher for deaf people and for blind people. Then his first son was born, and he was deaf. He became deaf through malaria. Or through the medicine he had to take from malaria. And then again, the whole society went all over him, and he said they had this bias against him. And he said, well, first of all, he could escape from the jungle. Then he is a teacher for deaf people, and now he has a deaf child. He must be a witch. There must be something funny about this guy. So they completely isolated him. Even his wife left him. And he was alone with this kid. And you can imagine in an African society, a man being alone with a little baby boy. So he took this baby boy, and he said, well, this boy has a right to live. He is deaf, but he has a right to live. And he went through churches. He actually was a preacher himself before, and he went through churches, and he lost his religion throughout because he said, well, the people were not listening. They were just thinking of themselves. And later he came to Kanthari to learn how to change attitudes of society towards people with disabilities, and not only towards people with disabilities, but also towards parents, for example, of disabled children. He came back to Uganda and he started a school which is called the Very Special School, not the special school, but the Very Special School, where he has children with special needs and children who are so-called disabled. But he says, well, we all have a disability. And he sees disability actually as the mother of invention and the mother of innovation, because we only create things when we have a lack, when we have a limit. And therefore we have to embrace our limitations and our disabilities.
That's so brilliant, isn't it? That when to look at that word in a positive way, and it's when we don't have, that's when we create. And
Yes,
so if we
exactly.
have a disability, that's such a powerful, moving story, Sabriye. I was visualizing this little, maybe 14, 15-year-old boy in the forest in Uganda. Oh, my word. We have so much to learn from so many people around the world. But how do you manage, Sabriye? How do you manage, you support other people within the Kanthari organization, but how do you manage on a daily basis your own unconscious biases? How do you learn and grow?
First of all, it's very difficult to manage unconscious bias. We have to make the unconscious bias conscious first, right? Yeah. And that is only possible if you are open to reflect and open to be brutally honest to ourselves and about what we have done, and are not just looking at ourselves to pat ourselves on the back, but also seeing what went really wrong today. How can I change? How can I make this better? Also being able to apologize. I think in this society where everybody is praised for what they are, I think we unlearned to apologize and to really say we mistaken. We are mistaken sometimes, or many times, right? Probably once a day, probably we are doing something foolish. And I think it's very, very important, especially in this time, and where now is my bias against sighted people. Okay, can you? I hope you can.
Go for it. Go for it.
Can handle that. I think sighted people can be very, very, very much focused on themselves. That is fed through selfies. It's fed through Instagram. It's fed through photos. It's fed through likes, Facebook likes. I mean, how many people are so addicted to their Facebook likes, right? And how many people are so addicted to their phones? Of course, I mean, I lived in Tibet for a long time. I didn't have a smartphone for a long time. But I do feel coming back into this world, and now I'm living in India where smartphones are really, really playing a very important role. And I do feel there is too much, especially in these times of crisis, especially in these times of lockdowns, especially in these times where we are actually separated through social distancing. I don't like this word social distancing, right? We have such a focus on who we are, how are we perceived, how are people looking at us, right? That we forget to communicate. And I think communication is so important. Now we have here in Kanthari, with people from all around the world, all different backgrounds, we have one very, very strong rule. We have an auditorium, which is the meeting point, which is there for dinners and lunches and breakfast, but also where we have a lot of sessions and workshops going on, and no phones are allowed. So it's a complete phone-free zone. And it's not easy to implement that because a lot of people, I'm the only blind person right now in the campus, everybody else is sighted, and people are clinging to their cell phones and are clinging to their social media and to their Instagrams and to their whatever is boosting their confidence. And I think we should try to gain confidence through communication, through listening to each other, through talking, through sharing stories, through also apologizing if we did something wrong, through reflecting our own biases, and through making our unconscious bias really conscious. And I think this is only possible if we interact more and being more face-to-face. Luckily, the Kerala government welcomed us to open this year. And we have 17 people from around the world who are here to learn how to make their societies, how to make their places a little bit better, how to make positive changes in the world. And we are very, very grateful for that we could, in this really strict times, of course, we have to have strict measures, of course, through COVID, but how we can actually operate and help people to get stronger, to overcome this crisis together, and not just by themselves.
No, and that is just, it is so powerful, Sabriye. It really is, because it's really about humility. It's about self-reflection. It's about genuinely listening and communicating with openness. And yes, I mean, the social media and phones and so on have taken over the world. And you have an advantage because you're not dependent on that. Unfortunately, most of the world looks at smartphones every day, many times a day. But there was a time with sighted people or blind people who did not have smartphones or any phones.
Yes.
It was just a landline. I grew up in India where we had one little phone and that was it. And so, people were, so some aspects of communication has changed, and we need to go back to the old days in some ways. But I think the other point of really being humble and listening and self-reflecting is so powerful. It's wonderful. I could keep talking with you forever, Sabriye, but I think we should stop. For people who are interested to know more, you can Google and find Kanthari.org. Kanthari is spelled Kanthari, Kanthari.org, and you'll find out what Sabriye does with Paul Kronenberg. Sabriye Tenberken, thank you so very much for sharing your stories of unconscious bias.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please do share with someone. That's the best promotion the podcast can have. The more we hear these amazing and brave stories from speakers around the world, the more we can learn about this important subject of unconscious bias. I'm Smitha Tharoor. See you next week.